Well, thank you everybody for coming. I hope the accommodations are comfortable. I think I know why you're here. Today's decision by the Connecticut Supreme Court, I think we would all say was a long time in coming. And it marks a turning point in what has been a nearly five-year-long legal battle waged by 10 very courageous families who were drafted on the day of Sandy Hook, on the Sandy Hook shooting, into a club that nobody would ever volunteer for. And there began a decision by the families to pursue, by any means necessary, some sense of justice and some acknowledgement for their children and their loved ones that had been so terribly taken away from them on that day. Today, the court essentially has said something that is a very basic principle in the legal community, and that has defined us as a country since our inception, which is that nobody's above the law. Nobody is above the law. That's really the takeaway from the decision. And even a gun company that is powerful, even a gun industry that is politically connected, and even in the face of some statutory protections, no industry is fully above the law. The courts has clearly, first of all, the court has said that the gun industry is, and in this case, Remington, is protected in many, many ways that otherwise other industries don't get. And they have not approved of many of our claims based on that that immunity. But they've approved of this fundamental principle that that you cannot, as an industry or as a company that is engaged in the sale, marketing of dangerous items, you can't engage in reckless marketing that does nothing to address a problem, but only contributes to it. They have said today that the gun industry may bear certain responsibilities to provide a solution to this epidemic that we have. And it could start with responsible marketing. Instead of marketing that simply exacerbates and increases the risk to the public at large. They are not above the law, and I think that we would invite, on behalf of the Sandy Hook families, responsible gun industry and gun companies to do something about it before it's too late. It's too late for the victims of Sandy Hook. But instead of promoting violent use of their weapons, it's time to get engaged and protect the public. Our next step, in that note, I'll take some questions.
Or if anybody has questions for David, Ian, or Bill, who are behind Josh.
Is there a specific advertisement you can point to that you all, that's come to your attention that is of concern?
Well, I think many of you have seen many of these advertisements. There are the advertisements that feature a lone gunman on an empty battlefield. This is not the type of use that is constructive to public safety. There are the images that promote the masculinity of the weapon that is meant to be conferred by simply buying an AR-15. There are images daring you, and with the copy, forces of opposition bow down, you have been single-handedly outnumbered. But in the world that we all live in, there are no hordes or forces of opposition that we need to make bow down. But in the minds of a lone gunman, they become children, they become concert goers, they become church goers, and there is almost no place we can turn anymore to be free from these potential lone gunmen that the industry covets with an apparent view that they are above the law. And obviously in our current age, product placement. Not the kind of product placement where you have something in the background of a movie, but the product placement in video games like Call of Duty that train shooters like the shooter in the Sandy Hook case on how to have the most effective and lethal use their weapon in the most effective and lethal means. And we know that was done in this case because there's clear evidence that the shooter used tactical means that he likely learned from the Call of Duty series. So these are all deliberate efforts by the industry to sell more weapons to more people on their apparent belief that they are above the law. And what the good that ought to immediately come out of this case is to cause a day of reckoning in the boardrooms of gun industries across the country, so that instead of focusing on how do we sell the most weapons to the most people, maybe they can start focusing on how do we reduce the risk to the public that on almost a daily basis now affects our freedoms to come and go as we please.
Josh, do you expect this to go to the U.S. Supreme Court?
I don't, but because it's not a case. First of all, this is a state case, and the ultimate arbiter of our case is the state Supreme Court. There's no larger jurisdictional issue here. However, that's not, I mean, whether Remington tries or not, I don't know. You know, Remington has tried everything during this 5-year period to prevent us from looking at their stuff. And at the end of the day, you just have to wonder, what are they hiding? Why not just turn it over? If they are so confident that we don't have a case, let's see your stuff. Let's see your stuff. And that stuff is just another word for discovery, and that's what our plan is, to get right into that and to shed light for the public on what happens behind closed doors.
For families who have been affected by this absolute tragedy and have been fighting for close to 5 years, how are they feeling? What's the response?
Well, we've got families here. You can ask them. Who wants?
You know, I can't say. My name is Ian Hockley. My son Dylan was one of the 6-year-olds killed in the shooting. I can't say I'm excited by this ruling. I wish I was never here. But what we've said from the outset is, all we want is our day in court, for the law to be upheld, and for a jury to decide our case.
I have to, David Wheeler, my son Ben was in the classroom where he was killed at Sandy Hook Elementary. I'd have to echo Ian's comments. This is not, while something to be grateful for in terms of our reaction to the Connecticut Supreme Court, this is a very difficult day. And I too wish that we didn't have to be here at all. That would be ideal. But here we are, and there is a reason that this particular consumer product is the one that is used by people who want to inflict the most damage, and we've seen an example of that time and time again in the 6 years, almost 6 years since my son and his classmates and teachers were murdered. And that reason very likely partially resides in the information we can now look at. It partially resides at the feet of the manufacturers and their advertising and marketing policies.
Hi, my name's Bill Sherlock. My wife Mary was the school psychologist that day in Sandy Hook, and I concur with both Ian and you know, David. This is nowhere where we want it to be. But that being said, I'll spend the rest of my life in this particular avenue in one way, shape, or form. In my mind, what I'm looking to find out in this whole process, essentially, is what went on inside. What went on inside Remington? Let's see the internal documents, the internal emails, as to what the charges were to their marketing and ad execs. Who is it we're trying to target? Why are we targeting them? Did they knowingly go about this kind of procurement of violence? My guess would be that they thought they were acting with some degree of impunity under PLACA, that sheltered them from everything. But the Supreme Court today in Connecticut has come out to say, no, not here in Connecticut. This does not absolve you of all your sins. You cannot be sheltered from anything that you may or may not to come to see the light of day. So in my mind, that's where we are today. This is another step forward to the discovery process where we can peel back the layers of the corporate entity of Remington and find out exactly what their goals were and what their objectives were behind the marketing of this particular product.
What would your response be to gun companies and other manufacturers who say that these weapons are used in combat, that these weapons are used by police forces, that they're, people, anybody with a firearms, FFL or license could purchase these, and they're well in their right to do so, these particular types?
Well, I think the core issue that the court has zeroed in on is, even accepting that to be true, it doesn't mean that a company like Remington can then engage in marketing practices that only increase the risk of their misuse against the general public. It's not so much about their ability. In fact, the court rejected our argument that it would be a negligent entrustment to sell one of these weapons under the terms that they sell them to the general public. But what they're saying more than that is that if you're going to sell them to the general public, you carry with you a time-honored burden to protect the public if you're engaged in the business. Every company does it, and you're not immune from that. Ford does it. All the car manufacturers do it. Every company does it except for, in this case, Remington, likely because they thought they could get away with it. Not because, anybody that looks at the marketing, and this is really what motivated the families from the beginning, was when, after the shooting, Jackie Barton, who's not here, she did a little internet search. She saw how the weapon that she had never heard of, this AR-15 Bushmaster, was marketed, and she saw that it was marketed in a way that said, you've got your man card reissued if you buy one of these weapons. Well, that speaks to people who will use the weapon in a way that was used that day at Sandy Hook. So
outlets all over the country have been trying to get in touch with Remington. When you call them, you get all circuits are busy or voicemail full. What's your reaction to that? Can't even get in touch with them.
maybe they need a new server. No, I think that I don't have a reaction to that. I don't know. It sounds like a lot of people are trying to get in touch with them.
Hey, Josh,
so.
what do you think that, assuming they don't appeal this, what do you think the timetable will be for them to start turning over the documents you're looking for? And do you want those to be made public, or do you think that they're going to try to seal them?
We will always do our best to make every document public. Let me make that very clear. The families want that. We want that. That is the legal system operating at its best, to shed light on things that we, the public, don't often get to see, because only through that do you get to the truth. So we'll always make every effort we can. There are some protections, as you may probably all know, about protective orders and things that companies, especially Remington, will do to try to keep their secrets in the dark. But so we'll do our best to do that. That ought to start. It ought to start relatively soon. There are some procedural things that have to happen first. But we're ready. The moment we're given the green light to proceed with discovery, we'll be ready. We've been waiting for a long time. We can wait a little longer. These families aren't going anywhere, okay? They're not going anywhere. They've been engaged in this fight for a long time, and they have the patience and courage like you wouldn't believe. They've lost so much.
Is there any evidence to suggest that Remington was intentionally targeting a demographic that you would consider to be mentally vulnerable?
Sure.
In some way?
I mean, first of all, that is what discovery is all about. Is there any evidence? We don't. I mean, there's evidence. There's a lot of evidence out there that seems to imply to a reasonable person that they were targeting certainly high-risk users for military use. But they themselves celebrated their success with a younger demographic. In their corporate filings, they talked about the long-term prospects, the long-term consumer base that would make their company a great investment, because young people love to buy them and accessorize them. So there's plenty of evidence out there, which is sort of unusual. It's not like we're starting from a completely blank slate. But we expect that those things don't happen accidentally. You don't get to a marketing campaign like this because somebody comes into the office one day and clicks on an icon. These are all well thought out, and we know that it was paying dividends for Remington. And so this was a deliberate scheme, we know. The full extent of it, that's why the legal system exists.
For any of the parents, what would you hope for other parents, perhaps parents who have guns in the home? I've heard that there's a parent who their child survived Sandy Hook and they've taken their child to lessons and things like that. What would you hope those type of parents to understand with the development and what's happening here?
Well, I just would say to any victim of this type of violence, I think today's decision just kind of reminds us that, you know, the law isn't just there to protect the powerful and the influential. It's there to protect all of us. And you're not forgotten.
But for, you know, parents